Hello and welcome to another episode of the Land Party Lawyers podcast. My name is Nick Brown, and I'm joined as always by my colleague and co-host, Steve Blickensderfer. To our regular listeners, welcome back. To our new listeners, on this podcast, we tackle issues at the intersection of video games, law, and business. Through debate, discussion, and interviews, we focus on the legal issues in particular, and we offer our takeaways and our thoughts. But please remember, nothing we or our guests say is legal advice or an official statement of their organization. Now, today, we're going to be talking about legal issues that are facing today's top esports teams. We've got a great interview set for you. We're going to hear directly from the head of two teams we know that you've heard of, the Florida Mutineers and the Florida Mayhem, which are the Call of Duty and Overwatch teams of the Misfits Gaming Group. Today, we're going to be talking to John Kracum, the president of these teams and the vice presidents of the Misfits Gaming Group. So before we get there, Steve, why don't you give us some context?
Thanks, Nick. It's important before we dive in the interview to just get an understanding of the esports landscape. We've talked about esports in several past podcasts, but just to give everyone a baseline understanding, just as in sports, there are Tier 1 games, just as you have baseball, football, basketball are considered Tier 1 sports. There are Tier 1 games in esports. And just to list a few of those, you have Call of Duty, League of Legends, the Overwatch League. You also have some in fighting games such as Smash, Tekken, and others. And you have a whole other realm of games, Dota 2, CSGO, Smite, StarCraft 2. So you can get a sense. There are a lot of teams, and they kind of have different tiers where you have some that are at the top, and then they kind of go down from there. Most of the top games have organized leagues, but not all of them, right? Nintendo is famous for not officially really supporting Smash in the way that the competitive community wants it to. And on the other end, you have some organizations, some game companies that are so involved in the organization of their game's competitive scene that they can maybe even be seen as overly active in the space.
And everything in between.
Right. Controlling a lot, and we're going to get into a little bit of that in a little bit. But game companies, another distinctive characteristic of esports is over traditional sports, is that game companies own the football. And we've talked about this on our previous IP episode. Compare that to sports. No one owns a football. No one owns a baseball. But in esports, there is a company that owns that particular IP, and that's why you have so much control in many instances, because they're just trying to protect their IP, their assets.
That's right. It adds layers of complexity to the legal issues that the teams face.
Right, and then you couple that with maybe sports games like NBA 2K and FIFA, and those game companies, not only do they have their own IP, but they also have to work with the sports leagues for licensing, so it's like even more complicated when it comes to those games, but it results in a myriad of legal issues facing esports teams, which, Nick, I think you're going to give us a list of what those are.
Sure. Well, we're going to talk about some of these in more detail with John shortly. But just to give you some context and kind of the lay of the land in terms of some of the common legal issues that face teams, it's basically a blend of sports and entertainment law. So they're going to have employment and labor issues by virtue of the fact that these are entities that often employ either a few people or many people. You're also going to see a lot of IP, intellectual property issues, and these are a little more complex, as Steve just previewed, than they are in other traditional sports areas, because a lot of times you have to, adjust and negotiate the same type of rights or different bundles of rights between the player, the game companies who make the games that they play, the brands that sponsor them, and of course the team that employs the player. There's also a bunch of immigration issues that come up, especially as people travel from country to country to play. I know there have been some issues in the news lately of people seeking to get visas to come and play in the United States. And those all raise a number of discrete legal issues that are specific to immigration. There's also investment and funding and sponsorship issues, like we talked about on our esports investment episode last season. There's a lot of complicated rules there on how teams can make their money, and how event coordinators can do the same thing and get the capital that is necessary to put on these events. And of course, there's general corporate advice, issues with incorporation and setting up multiple tiers of entities and other entities to hold them, so that the appropriate legal and fiduciary and tax requirements are all being observed. And then finally, this is not an exhaustive list, but the last big one that we've seen lately is like ad tech. So think about online advertising and marketing and stuff involving the TCPA, which is the federal law that aims to prevent robocalling. It doesn't actually prevent it, as we all know, but it aims to do so.
Yeah, and to couple with all those legal issues kind of as a background, we wanted to just address some of the trends that we've been observing in esports. And right now, the most, I guess, obvious one is that esports is currently the only game in town. We are recording this during...
That's it, baby. Nothing else.
During the official quarantine and lockdown of society. And the number of people playing games is at a record high. The number of people watching others play games is at a record high. Just recently, NASCAR racing is being broadcast on television and in lieu of live racing, and they're seeing amazing numbers, such that those in the traditional NASCAR space were like, wow, we did not expect that. NBA players are playing NBA 2K and competing from their homes. And you have health officials who are actually encouraging video games as a way to stay home and socially distance from one another.
It's been amazing. I've been watching every day. There's a new concurrent player record of games, that some games that are currently popular, other games that I didn't think were that popular, but now, every day we're seeing bigger and bigger numbers as everyone starts to distance. And so, we've, of course, been talking to you about the increasing trends of esports and electronic gaming for a while now, but this is really sending it leaps and bounds ahead of schedule.
Right. You also, separate other trends, just to kind of go through them, we have leagues moving to exclusive deals with platforms. This is something that we thought could happen, and we definitely saw it happen when Activision Blizzard went with a deal with YouTube. They announced a deal to have their competitive esports in Overwatch, Hearthstone, some others that I'm just not remembering, going and being displayed. Oh, Call of Duty, that one too, being displayed on YouTube. That's exclusively online, right? And just recently we saw another announcement that they're going to be looking into announcing a deal to also broadcast on traditional TV media. So, but I just think the leagues moving to exclusive deals on online platforms is an important trend to watch and to see how that develops going forward. You also have leagues increasingly moving to franchise models. That's having a team in Paris, a team in New York, a team in Florida, like the Florida Mayhem or Mutineers, and also moving to have homestands. Now, this is a move going to traditional sports. So esports taking a page out of the traditional sports model to increase engagement and fan engagement, in particular in their teams. Regardless of who's playing on the teams, they are a fan of their local team, right? And they go out and they're able to watch their players play live, at these events, at the homestands, which
theoretically,
right. When everything goes back to normal,
right.
We also have trending player organization in terms of talks of unions and collective bargaining, and also trade associations. Counter-Strike, CS:GO in particular, is very, very cutting edge at the forefront of this with the CSPPA, the Professional Players Association for Counter-Strike. This has been, I guess, problematic in the U.S. in a lot of ways because of it's hard to create a union for an international esport. So you kind of have to have them regionally, I guess, set up and established, but we can get into that in the future. Maybe we'll get into that in this episode. But whether or not we're going to see more players organize is basically the trend, and I think we are. How it's going to look is to be determined. And teams increasingly engaging with brands and turning to lifestyle gaming. That's another big one we're seeing, in addition to competitive gaming, just a culture of lifestyle gaming. We see that with 100 Thieves, some other FaZe, some other esports teams. And so I suspect we're going to see more of that in the future as well. But enough of me rambling on, Nick. Let's transition over and talk to John Kracum, as you mentioned, president of Mayhem and the Mutineers. and VP of Misfits Gaming Group. John, welcome to the show. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Nick. It's great to be on. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, John, I just wanted to start off with an easy softball question. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into gaming and esports?
Yeah, that's a fair first question. And I'll try and go chronologically by relevant information. So, growing up, I just played a ton of video games. My younger brother and my cousin and I would spend summers together. We all lived in the Midwest, and we'd like sit in a room for 12 hours a day playing whatever.
What era would this have been in? Were you playing GoldenEye, or were you playing
with Super Nintendo?
Okay.
64 was the big one. So yeah, GoldenEye,
Right.
the original Super Smash Brothers, and
Perfect
then eventually
Dark.
Melee. Yeah, we played a decent amount of Perfect Dark. Less Perfect Dark than GoldenEye, probably. I think it was Battle Tanks on N64 was a big one. Halo eventually was massive. We played a ton of Halo. And yeah, we had three. We actually got to 3 rooms and had a LAN setup so that we couldn't screen peek with each other.
Nice.
So
Beautiful.
that was,
I see you guys took it seriously.
the beginning of competitive esports?
Yeah, exactly. And then eventually Counter-Strike was what at least my brother and I got really into. So I actually in college I played one professional Counter-Strike tournament, and we got 16-0'd by United 5, who I think were the 5th best team in the world at the time. So it was fun. We got to play against them, and we won our game before that. It was a great time. We were really happy to be there, but it was good to prove that we weren't cut out to be professional gamers. My brother was he got a 4K in one of the rounds, so that was the highlight of the tournament for us.
Oh, that's great.
But anyway, so yeah, a lot of gaming in my background. Played a bunch of World of Warcraft and other things from then on.
Alliance or Horde?
Oh, Alliance.
Ooh, that's okay. Nobody's
monster.
perfect.
Yeah, I was a human paladin all the way. But yeah, so then finished out college, worked for a few years, then went to Northwestern Law, graduated and had married a California girl, so that she took me out to the West Coast. I worked for DLA Piper's corporate team in Silicon Valley, so worked with a lot of startup companies out there, which was a ton of fun, really great experience for a few years. In that window of working at DLA was really when some of the earliest publicly visible and active lawyers who focused solely on esports kind of joined the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd been watching esports for a while at that point. My brother introduced me to League of Legends during the first Worlds, I think regional qualifiers. I watched the North American regionals for the first competitive year, and that was my introduction to kind of esports at least a globally broadcast online level. Before, when I was playing Counter-Strike, it was all you had to record your games, and then they would get uploaded to some websites, and you could go download the replay of whatever game you wanted to watch and watch it in the Counter-Strike client.
I spent a lot of time on sc2replays.com.
Right on.
When I had delusions of being competitive at that game.
Yeah, so you were there, but but yeah, I did a lot of that for Counter-Strike, but yeah, it was great. The advent of Twitch and live online broadcasting was awesome, and so I watched a ton. And then working for a law firm, I started reaching out to lawyers who were doing this full time and said, I'm pretty passionate about this. Like, how can I start adding this to my practice or figure it out? Find a way to do this for a living. And just networked, and it took about 2 years to get introduced to Ben Spunt, who's the CEO of Misfits Gaming Group, and flew out, had an interview with him, talked things over for a bit, and he offered to bring me in-house as in-house counsel. It turns out most of the board, at least at the time, it's since expanded, was made up of ex-lawyers, and so they liked the idea of having a lawyer in-house, which was lucky for me.
Is that consistent with other esports teams that they have a lot of ex-lawyers, or is Misfits different in that regard?
It's not super unusual. I've run into a decent amount of ex-lawyers in the industry. It was. I think it was probably unusual that almost everybody I talked to, it was an ex-lawyer when I came to do my interview.
Right.
So it was a little extreme on this side, but
so Misfits is on one.
I can't get away from you people.
Yeah, exactly.
So Misfits is on one end of the spectrum, and then you have just teams with no lawyers on the other, and just
yeah, exactly. Players who self-organize as the other example. But no, it was a really great opportunity. So I started working, staying in the West Coast originally, and have since moved to Florida. Started as in-house counsel. Kind of got to know the business and was working a lot with our Overwatch League team, which had just started up, and we were staffing up. And at the end of the first season, I went to Ben and the board and said, hey, here are a couple of people we can hire to really kind of take over what we're doing on the Activision Blizzard side with the Overwatch League. And they interviewed a few folks, and then came back to me and said, hey, John, do you just want to do it? And leave your official lawyer title behind. And I said, yeah, I'll be an ex-lawyer too. I'll join the club. So now I'm a recovering lawyer and president and running operations for our 2 Activision Blizzard franchises.
That's great.
That's great.
Do you find it difficult? To
no, go ahead.
Manage a team not based in LA or New York?
No. I mean, there are reasons to be in one of those 2 cities. I'd say LA in particular has been such an esports hub, and is where a lot of endemic sponsors tend to be based. So I think there's a pretty reasonable advantage to being in LA, but I think that the advantages to us being in Florida outweigh that. So no, I don't think it's been difficult.
What are some of those advantages?
I mean, the biggest one, it's mostly obvious, which is both of these Activision Blizzard leagues have gone into regional franchising, like you described in the intro, and so as the Florida team, it makes a lot of what we do much easier to be in our market, and I don't know exactly what the split is offhand between teams, regionalized teams being in market versus being in a separate home base, usually LA, and then kind of operating through their market. But when we're pitching local sponsors, when we're trying to figure out homestands, even just filming content, like we need our players to film a video when we want shots of them on the beach in Miami or up in Orlando at around the theme parks. Like it's to have to fly people out to LA from LA to do that every time is just unreasonable.
Yeah.
And so I think that being in market for us is a major reduction in transaction costs. And also, our long-term goal, as which I think is going to be a major long-term goal, not only of these leagues, but of a lot of leagues going forward, is driving local fan base, local fans to our brand and to our teams. And it's just harder to do if you're not in the neighborhood. So I think that I think that those are both massive advantages to us being located in market.
Yeah. So what are how does that look? What are the efforts to get people to come and show up and invest in a local team? I mean, being local, like you said, seems to break down certain barriers, but what's if you're comfortable talking about the steps you've taken, what do those look like, and what seems to be having the most effect?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that we ask ourselves every day.
I bet.
Because it's one of our biggest jobs over the next few years. But the first one is done, which is have Florida in our name. That is just being in a league that attaches itself to a location instantly creates a reason for somebody local to be a fan of our team. And at a league level, it creates a reason for people to be a fan of the game in the league. If they didn't have one before. So that's done, and that's great. After that, local events is huge, and finding appropriate ways to market to the right audiences. So we, over the first 2 years of the Overwatch League, while we were still based in LA because we had to play all of our games in LA, minus a few in season 2, we ran, I think it was the most watch parties out of all the Overwatch League franchises. We had 23 watch parties in season 1.
Wow.
And I think we had 28 or 29 in season 2. And that was because we were running multiple per. For some weeks, we ran in multiple cities watch parties.
Could you describe what a watch party is for those who don't know?
Yeah, of course. So that's these games are broadcast in front of a live audience, but especially in the first 2 years, it was in a studio with where you'd cap at 500 or so attendees, and meanwhile they're being broadcast online to hundreds of thousands plus people watching, and for big events, millions. So the online broadcast is free. It's easy to access, and that's how most people watch. So a watch party is just, hey, let's find a way to put our broadcast in a public or semi-public space that we can rent out, and get a bunch of our fans to show up and cheer for the team together, and make it a more engaging and fun experience for people who otherwise would be sitting at home with maybe the stream on their second monitor, playing a game or something on their other monitor. So it's simple, and we ran these at a bunch of different bars, restaurants, event centers. Right now,
and the Fortress, right?
Yeah, Full Sail Fortress.
I went to the one at the Fortress. Just for anyone considering going to one of these, let me. Well, once life picks up as normal again, of course. Let me just tell you, it was an absolutely phenomenal experience, and to have, it's one thing to watch it on a second stream, just like a second monitor, just like you were saying, John. It's another thing to be there when every twist and turn, the crowd is going bonkers and yelling. It was, I saw enthusiasm there that would rival anything that I've seen at a live traditional sports game. So let me just plug that for a second, because that was a great event.
Speaking of live events, maybe let's transition to what you're doing now. How has the transition from the live events, hybrid online events, to just all online events and competitions gone for you and your teams?
So I imagine it's probably smoother than people think. Although maybe not. I honestly don't know what the public thoughts are around this, but we, at least within our organization, we're set up pretty well after the move to Florida. We've got our office with practice spaces for both of our teams that have the same competitive setups that they have in arena at live events. They also have the same setups every player has the same setup in their apartment or home, so they can get quality practice if they're playing in their off time. So technically, we were pretty.
You were set up already.
Ready to do anything from anywhere. So that there were no big technical hurdles for us to go online. Honestly, it was a huge disappointment for us, for our players, not to be able to play in front of a home crowd this year, because that is amazingly fun to do. Having been to other teams' events, and we haven't been able to host one yet. Our Overwatch League event was canceled. It was the first event canceled due to coronavirus concerns in either of these two leagues, and it was canceled, I think, 4 days before it was set to start. So it was a major bummer. And there were little issues just around managing that whole cancellation, but not anything material.
How have you managed to keep your teams competitive during the times when either you're not even in the same room, you're in different houses, but there's for those who don't know, there's a need for and a definite talking and communication amongst players. It probably happening on the headsets, I guess, now, but even live at the event, to talk, to make sure you're coordinating with your teammates, because that's just super important. How has that kind of happened?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll give you a funny, quick answer, but I have to caveat with, I'm really excited for our teams to continue to play this season. I think we're gonna do well and improve. We are in the Overwatch League side, particularly Call of Duty. We've been very good, better than most people thought. But since we've started playing from home, I think we haven't won a single map in a game. But we've only played once in the Overwatch League, and we got 3-0'd by Atlanta, who's got an incredible roster. They're great. So
Yeah.
kudos to them. But so the question: are we staying competitive? I don't know. But no, we are. Our coaching staff in
Improvise,
both
adapt,
leagues are doing-
overcome.
yeah, exactly. No, our coaching staff in both leagues are doing great jobs. But Steve, you're right. I mean, the communication and both in-game and out is super important for the teams. In-game, I'd say it actually hasn't been very impacted, because even when the guys are all sitting in the same room, they've all got headsets on because they have to hear the game sounds,
Right.
and so by default they're all communicating over some voice chat tool. So that has changed essentially zero. I'd say the biggest change there is that usually the coach can kind of walk around behind each player and look at what they're doing over their shoulder, and now they have to use the in-game client to be switching between players. So it's a little more effort for some of the coaches, but even that is not significantly worse off. So the in-game stuff is all pretty much the same as far as team preparation goes. The out-of-game stuff is definitely harder, and because you don't, when practice ends in our facility, the guys all get up, they talk about what happened because they're all in the same room. They go sit down, they watch a replay of either that practice or a previous game together, and that's just becomes a little harder to coordinate, like
Sure.
just like teleconferencing does when you got somebody saying, "Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me? I got to run to the bathroom. I have a heart out," and whatever. It's just everybody deals with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's not the same.
so yeah, that has definitely been a little harder. We're not in a unique position. All the teams are having to deal with it. So I think from a competitive standpoint, it's not something I'm concerned about, other than being concerned about how we can improve it.
Nice. Well, you guys are in, we already discussed Call of Duty League, which just launched its first season. And Call of Duty just also launched Warzone. You're in League of Legends, which is in its 10th season. You guys field the team Misfits does in the LEC, which is in Europe. We also discussed you're in the Overwatch League, and your team there is the Florida Mayhem. And you also field a team Misfits does in Smash, or at least a player. Could you give me a sense of, is it a benefit to have different, like a Florida team here versus a Misfits team there, as opposed to just Florida Misfits everywhere? Is there a benefit to having distinct brands in these different games?
There are benefits and there are costs, for sure. And I do want to correct you in that
Please do.
we actually
It's one of my favorite things to do, John.
yeah, I mean,
Happens regularly.
It's a bad correction because he's an awesome guy, but Angelic, who was our fighting game player on our roster, we released a few weeks ago. So we're not represented in fighting games. What you didn't call out was Fortnite. We have
That's
seven-
right. That's right. That's what I meant to say.
yeah. And we have one mobile player as well, Surfaway, who's a great dude. Plus a couple of streamers and things. But to get to the core question, I'd say the biggest advantage that it gives us is that we can position those brands slightly differently. Organizationally, we have kind of some main branding and guiding tentpoles around inclusivity, diversity, positivity, and competition. Those are kind of our four guiding lights that have to be represented in all of our brands.
Mhm.
But from there on, brands can still take different tones, have different maturity levels is an obvious one. Like Call of Duty is a mature game, so the ability to have a separate Mutineers brand that's unique to Call of Duty means that we can, maybe we have content. We put out a video recently that was bleeped out, but it was how to be an effing pro with one of our Mutineers players,
Right.
and it was great. Like it was a really funny concept. He did a great job in the video. Like it's good content that wouldn't work.
Right. You're not going to do that with your Fortnite team.
Yeah, exactly. so it gives us the freedom to do things with one portion or one brand that that aren't appropriate for other brands. And to that point, it also gives potential sponsors the option of identifying with either one or multiple brands based on their own goals. We have sponsors who have said they're not interested in Call of Duty, period, but they sponsor us in the Overwatch League and and with Misfits. We've had sponsors say they're only interested in Call of Duty. So it's I think that the benefits to the sales process are greater than if everything was the same brand and it was a take it or leave it situation that we presented every sponsor with.
Yeah, I didn't appreciate that. That's good.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that. So if I'm understanding you correctly, certain brands they have more affiliation or receptiveness to certain games than others, and some of that may be due to the fact that, for example, Call of Duty, like you said, it has a lot of mature content. It's gory. It's not cartoonish. There's curse words and things. And so naturally, some brands want to stay away from that, and that makes sense. My question to you is as you look, sometimes we ask people to look into their crystal ball and predict the future. And do you see that changing over time? I mean, 10 years from now, is everyone just going to understand that Call of Duty's Call of Duty and brands aren't going to be worried about the reflection that they're promoting violence or something like that? Or are these things relaxing, or do you see them getting more siloed? Like all the family brands are going to flock to the cartoonish more type games, and then you're going to keep seeing Monster and things like that throwing in on Call of Duty. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on it. I'll say that I think that probably the base answer to your question is no. I don't think it's going to change much in terms of how sponsors attach themselves to games, and that's true. Like that's not something unique to gaming or esports. Like sponsors identify products or brands or anything that has the audience that they're trying to go after, or that has the tone that they're trying to position themselves within, and whether that's related to violence or gender appeal or whatever. Like there are dozens of reasons why a brand wants to avoid associating itself with another brand. So that's not going to change, but I don't think that has anything to do with the other kind of issue that you're touching on there, which is the public perception and research around the impact of violent video games and what the value of the gaming as a whole. Like is it good for kids? Is it something that we want people to be doing? And that one I think will change. So that's where I hope more than anything to see a lot more change. If it can happen over the next 10 years, awesome. I think that's a reasonable timeline. And it's something that frankly I do and we do organizationally as we educate sponsors and partners. We work with. I've been to meetings with a lot of school districts here in Florida since we've been focused out here. So educating teachers and principals and leaders of education is massive for us. Yeah. And we're doing that, and there are a lot of other people doing that because I believe and I feel strongly that research backs this up, that gaming is far more is almost entirely positive, that the negatives of gaming are not caused by the games themselves. They're caused by the how people interact with it, and
It's the fact they're being played by people that's the problem.
Right, it's not guns killing people; it's people killing people. No. A little bit, but it's also there's also as good of an opportunity. It's the difference between there is I'd say an exaggerated difference in gaming of playing a pickup sport in a yard where you're versus playing in a league where you've got a coach and it's organized. Yard sports, you can get bullies, you can get a lot more negative behavior, and without putting a check on that, it's gonna leave a mark on people and change other people's behavior. But playing in a AYSO soccer or something, or playing in a school league, like you've got people teaching you positive behavior, and you're building skills in terms of communication and teamwork and problem solving that will make you a better person. So and the reason I say gaming is exaggerated, because at least on a playground, like you're in a group that's right there, you got people walking by, it is exaggerated in gaming, where if you've got somebody playing in their house alone, there are very few checks on their potential behavior.
With anonymity comes toxicity.
Exactly. So I totally understand why, at least not totally, but I at least accept that gaming has a how do I want to word it? I can't think of anything better than darker side. I don't think that's quite right, but there's
I know what you mean.
Darker side,
than
than traditional athletics, but that is not a function of gaming itself. That's gaming can be hugely positive, and when it's done in a healthy way, it is.
So, John, I want to jump in and switch gears a little bit, ask you some legal related questions, because I want to see.
All right, I'll see if I can.
Yeah, if you can remember.
We need some advice.
Yeah. No legal advice.
I see you still got your CLED.
Nick mentioned earlier, he listed a bunch of different issues. I just kind of wanted to ask a few questions in each. So on the topic of employment, I know because of the observing and being in it, the off season for esports is crazy. And I don't think very many people appreciate just how sudden the rush is to get a bunch of contracts negotiated. Could you just give us a sense and describe what the off season is like for your teams in particular?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. So for my two leagues, where I have the most information, I can also talk about League of Legends. But our off season is about 4 months, 3 to 4 months, and we usually have about, after the championship game, 6 or 8 week window, which has shifted a little bit, to negotiate with our existing players about extensions or re-signing folks before free agency hits. So usually what happens is, unfortunately, we haven't made the playoffs, so our window has been extended a little past couple of years. But we spend 4 to 6 weeks, hopefully doing a deep dive on what we expect the free agent market will look like, and the goal being, we want to know as closely as possible where reasonable upgrades are for us before we go to our existing players and say, hey, we're going to re-sign you or cut you or whatever we plan to do. So we try, it's a lot of, and thankfully our general manager for both teams, Tom on the Call of Duty side and Albert on the Overwatch side, are very organized and diligent and good at communicating with the other folks in the league, as I think is generally true across both leagues. So we're able to get a pretty good picture of what we expect, at least the names on the market. We do our best to peg what their contracts are going to look like.
What are some of the top issues that arise during the contract negotiation, like the common sticking points that you find?
Yeah, that's a really good question. But I think it's kind of a boring answer in that pretty much everything just boils down to money, and that's not a knock on anybody. It's just,
Sure.
there aren't.
Right. Money talks.
Money talks, and money talks far more than anything related to, stuff like streaming requirements or whether you live in an apartment or a house or whatever. And that, that stuff will come up. But yeah, end of the day, the players and agents want to know how much, what number am I going to see on my check? And
it's an important question.
Oh, speaking of agents, FaZe Clan got a little hot water in the Tfue lawsuit as a result of alleged actions that sounded like they were operating like a talent agency, which sounded like bringing deals to the player and getting a cut of that without being licensed under the appropriate regulation. Do you find that to be hard to distinguish deals brought to players versus teams, or what's your sense of that in terms of the contract negotiation process?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll say that thankfully it is not hard to distinguish when you are focused on the competitive model.
Yeah.
So for the Mayhem and the Mutineers and Misfits League of Legends, it's, in my slightly educated opinion, it's pretty cut and dried. Even though, to your point, there is a lot of, and I'll be generous to governments, federal and state, and say intentional ambiguity in the law around agency representation. And definitely, I think there are, say complex questions, but questions that legitimately have no solid answer because the law is ambiguous.
Yeah.
And that you get into more when you're dealing with, I think in the intro you brought up kind of lifestyle brands. You just mentioned FaZe. And when you're dealing with these folks who are signed to an org and are individual celebrities or influencers, and have the scale of personal brand that could drive them business without being attached to an org. And that's, we've got a couple of guys like that, and we are internally very careful about how we approach doing business specific to them. Clicks is a Fortnite player for us, and he's by far, he is our biggest, by a decent margin, our biggest influencer. Who's a player, and he is he's a great kid, and we're happy we like working with him. And there are definitely some internal barriers that we have set up to do our best to avoid the most obvious scenarios that would get us in hot water. So, it's for the most parts, the stuff we deal with is not very impacted by this gray area.
And that seems to be the result of your focus on the competitive versus the lifestyle.
Absolutely.
Gamer.
Yep.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to ask.
Yeah. So we can. You're welcome to ask a question, or I can just talk.
Yeah, no, please. I was just supporting the interest in that topic.
Well,
yeah, no. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say you kind of touched upon this in your answer, and it's kind of going along with this topic of IP issues, right? Where if you have a very popular streamer who then comes to you, or a gamer that just has a background, a presence online, you have to carefully craft through the contract the lines, right? What you are taking in terms of IP rights, what they have the full ownership and control over, what you're sharing, and shared time for events. I'm sure it just requires a lot of careful contract drafting.
Yeah, it does. I think that I think it's probably over time going to get more. The issues that get negotiated will be more and more narrow. I'd say for the most part, and again, this is probably impacted by the fact that almost everything we do is within the league, competitive league world, and we're a lot less focused on the individual influencer world. But most of our contracts are pretty are relatively simple in terms of IP. There's still some negotiation that goes on. I'd say the hardest point that's negotiated is how much and how long, if at all, we're able to use individuals' IP after they leave the team.
Right.
But
that's a big issue.
Yeah, which is a big issue, and that's one. Obviously, bottom line, we can't be expected to go back and comb through all of our posts over the last X years and delete everything that has that player in it. So that's the floor for us. And then obviously the where it's gray is if we're in the middle of a campaign or have a sponsor and have already shot video or whatever state we're in and need to continue to use somebody's IP for X amount of time, what does that window look like? So that I think is the point that gets negotiated the most right now, and will continue to be an issue going forward.
So
but it's a fair one. It's a good negotiation point. It's fun.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's similar to what we've heard from others too in terms of sticking points, and so it sounds like you're not alone in that regard. But let me switch gears just a little bit here. I'd like to ask you about immigration stuff for a moment. Before the coronavirus and this national, state, international stay-at-home stuff, there was a lot of travel, among teams, either for events or to go work for a team that exists outside of your area. So, and we can all expect that that'll happen again once this situation passes. But have any of your teams, have Misfits flirted with a lot of people that are outside the country and had to address immigration issues at all? It's been a major issue for us, and not that it's been at times it's been a struggle. It's not always one, but our Overwatch roster is entirely right now made up of Korean citizens. So there are 9. So you have a lot of experience
right there. And then our League of Legends roster, the team is based in Germany, but it has players from around Europe and Korea, and in Overwatch we've had European players, we've had American players. We've run it's definitely North America, Europe, Asia. I'm trying to think offhand if we've had South America, Australia, Africa represented.
Have you had any trouble with visas or obtaining them, or obtaining the appropriate documentation to allow them to come here and work?
Yes, we have. Thankfully, we've never had a full rejection for anybody, which has happened to several orgs.
Yeah.
Through no fault of theirs, and I think there's a lot. I don't know how much or how much I should, or you want me to, rail against the immigration policy of multiple countries, but particularly the United States.
Go for it.
But no, I mean it's this is all just man shouts at cloud. But it's or whatever that Simpsons quote is.
Yeah.
Picture is.
The news shot.
I imagine it's gotten tougher, right? Over the long term, it'll probably get easier as esports becomes more ubiquitous, but I can imagine it's only gotten harder for you guys to get what you need.
Yeah, no, the current administration has made it a lot harder. And they haven't targeted esports, but it's been just kind of an overarching decision of theirs to limit the level of immigration that had been allowed, at least as far as I was aware,
right.
over the previous administration. So yeah, it's gotten harder, a lot more. I'll get into a little specific. When you apply, most players come in under what's called a P1 visa, which is designed for professional athletes, people who are excellent, who have achieved international recognition within their sport. And for the highest level of esports, that had been, trying to remember when the first P1 was issued for esports. It was, I think, in the mid 2000s, I want to say, but that could be way off. So don't quote me on that one. Yeah, now that I'm saying it, that seems really early, but I don't know.
I had a very...
The internet will tell us.
Yeah, they'll tell us. I had an uneducated sense that it was like the early 2010s, but I could be mistaken about that.
No. You may be right now. I could be crossing wires on something, but it was a law firm who we've used for immigration work, who did the first one. They proudly claim that, but it became pretty ubiquitous for esports athletes to get on P1s, which means then you can get support staff in under P1S, which are people who essentially support exceptional athletes and have proven to be able to coach or do other have supporting roles at a high level in international competition. So
talking about international competition, could you maybe give us a sense of comparing the competition of like the Overwatch League, where you have teams all over the place, and then you have League of Legends where they have regional competitions and leagues, and then they'll have maybe one giant championship at the end. Is one easier than the other to manage from a team's perspective?
They haven't been, thankfully. I'll say, because I guess I'm still taking this from the immigration standpoint, but I can talk generally too. Immigration-wise, League of Legends, all the regional leagues, because they come together for a world championship, the proof of it being a highest level of international competition is as I think it's as easy to provide as it is for something like Overwatch League, where clearly it's a global league that is the highest level of competition. But
what about generally?
Yeah, in general, there are definitely advantages to and costs to both. Especially as Overwatch League and Call of Duty League transition to the local activation model, or homestand model, the cost not only of just putting on events and flying players to events and the toll on players and staff that much travel takes, but also like just the league being able to schedule it appropriately and not have teams flying to 4 different countries in 4 weeks and being at a massive immigration risk and or just simply unable to make their games work is really challenging.
I imagine as a result of this cancellation of live events that's tested the esports scene, that maybe they'll become more resilient, right? If certain teams can't make an event on the other side of the globe, they'll shift to a quick online competition, and you guys have been battle tested to handle that. Maybe that'll be something byproduct.
That's been.
Of this.
You're right. This has been great trial by fire for these leagues. Obviously, it's not something that we hope to have happen often.
Right.
It's sad. The current state of the world is tragic. But yeah, it's definitely made both leagues, I think particularly the Call of Duty League, more able to swap.
Could you briefly describe the relationship that esports teams typically have with game companies? Is it the same kind of across the board? Is it league dependent or game company dependent? I'm just trying to get a sense of your interactions with game companies. Are they consistent with another completely, maybe a lifestyle game esports team? Their interaction with the game company.
Totally. Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm going to preface it by saying that I'm going to try my best, and so these answers are going to be very carefully worded, not to call anybody out, because and that's not indicating that any partner is particularly good or bad. I just
in all fairness,
want to make sure everybody
keep using those lawyer skills.
Yeah, exactly.
You still got it, John. You still got it.
Yeah, I don't even want to seem like we're there are any issues. But all that said, yeah, I mean, the relationship with different developers and publishers is definitely different. And like you said in the intro to the episode, we're in a relatively unique situation where somebody owns the football, and so there is, to some degree, a strange balance of power in the relationship, and that can manifest in a lot of different ways. So definitely different publishers. I have different relationships with different publishers. I primarily work with one publisher, so my life is kept simpler. But I know people at all the publishers we work with closely, and some that we don't. And yeah, I mean, but even to go back to what I was mentioning with sponsors a while ago, different publishers have different goals for their individual, and that can be title by title. It can be publisher by publisher. So it makes sense that those relationships are different, and and I think that has created, honestly, in some ways, it's created better opportunities for us, in that there are times when we get to go to one publisher and say, "Hey, this other publisher is giving us this. Why aren't you giving it to us?"
Right.
And we can put a little peer pressure on them to do stuff that they may not do by default.
Right.
So that can be a fun little conversation.
It sounds like that creates opportunities, right? Both for you and also the companies, because that you might not necessarily know what they're doing with others, right? So that's kind of the whole competitive nature of everything.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, there's a point that you brought up at the end of your question or statement, talking about how our relationship may be different than the relationship of a lifestyle company or non-competitive company. And I think it is, for sure. I like to think that we have, I think closer relationship is not unfair with our franchise partners at the very least, but definitely a relationship where I expect there is more regular communication, because if you're a lifestyle brand, maybe you're going to put on a couple of tournaments, or participate a few times a year, and you'll need some level of irregular communication to get licenses or whatever. But ultimately, you're not day to day planning yourself in lockstep with the publisher.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Where we really are, like, a lot of the things that we do, aside from, and maybe not even aside from, like, including developing our local fan base and things that may be assumed to be more independent, is
that
something
makes
that we
perfect sense.
work with the publishers on. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense because it's symbiotic, right? I mean, you both
exactly
have a big stake, personal and financial, in the success of this game and this league, and so it makes perfect sense that you'd be more lockstep and more involved with them, right? Than someone who has a more remote connection to the game itself.
Mm-hmm.
And your comment and your answer really hits on the point that not all esports teams, U.S. esports teams, are created equal, right? You guys recently have been doing some real cool stuff, including launching a gaming startup incubator called MSF.io, if there's an acronym or a spelling out of that, I don't know, but MSF.io. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What prompted it and what's your vision for it?
Yeah, thanks for the softball, Steve. MSF.io is something we're really excited about. It relies on the idea that gaming is a very innovative space. There are lots of innovative spaces. Gaming is one of them, but there are major barriers in place. Not the least of which is how startups connect to brands in the space that are potential users of their product, platform, whatever, or potential partners. Because, frankly, Activision Blizzard is not is not Google, where their product is technology. It's they make games, and so they're not out there doing the same level of diligence on venture deals that Google is, and nor should they be. But there's a great opportunity
to fill that void.
Yeah, to be that relationship driver. So because we have these close relationships with publishers and not just publishers, but lots of people around the gaming space, people and companies around the gaming space, MSFIO is the theory that we can provide a lot more value than straight cash to small, early stage companies with really interesting ideas, developed plans that just simply have no clear path to developing those relationships. And so that's that's what we've done. We've set up MSFIO to be an incubator for early stage companies. We have a $10 million total seed fund that over hopefully the life of the program will grow and continue to be allocated, but to go to actually provide dollar support to these startups, but also as you go through the application process with us, we highly encourage these companies to, if they're not already based in South Florida, move down here at least temporarily and work out of what will become our permanent office when it opens up.
In Boca, right?
In Boca, it's an 18,000 square foot facility. We really don't need that much space right now, so we've set aside a big chunk of it for MSFIO.
That's great.
So we have office space, and we have, and not only do we have a place for you to work out of if you're working out of your garage or paying for a lease that you don't have to pay for if you're with us, but then you're right down the hall from professional gamers. You're going to have people from major publishers coming into the office every so often to meet with our management. You're connected to a lot of people in the space physically that you're not when you're developing your product otherwise.
This is a great idea. Everybody's probably doing this, right? All the other esports teams have an incubator.
I mean, hopefully don't spread the idea too quickly. We're proud to be the first that we know of in North America, at least.
Great.
We hope that it's so big of a success that it becomes necessary for all their teams to do it, but we also hope that we make it a success ourselves first.
Yeah.
Well, what a great idea this is, and you're really filling a need. There's just like you said, there's all this innovation out there, and sometimes people don't have the business acumen or know-how or experience or just the capital to get it off the ground. And so what a great idea for you to partner with them and incubate them and help set that up. I think that's really going to pay off over time and result in a lot of great partnerships and developments that may not otherwise be able to exist. In the same type of vein, can you tell us about your Misfits work with other entities and some of its other, either endemic or non-endemic? I was recently just reading that you partnered with SoFi, and I know that's going to be a big deal. It's going to help a lot of people too.
Yeah, no, we're really excited to bring SoFi on. They're coming on as very like a traditional sports sponsorship, but for us and for the space in general, they are not the first financial company period to be involved in esports, but definitely are one of a select few and have a kind of a unique brand and approach to what they're doing that I think is really fit for the space. SoFi is a great partner who we're excited to work with. B, they are very forward thinking about how they interact with their members. They have a lot of incredible programs for people who use their products. Through SoFi, if you set up a trading account with SoFi, they'll give you a certain amount of money, which I've seen they've promoted different offers over time. So I don't want to say a dollar amount right now, but generally they give people free money to play with day one. You put in $1, they'll give you a lot more. Just so you can, if you have never bought a stock before, you can play around and learn, and they support you. They have really great training programs for people. They're very interested in teaching younger audience how to manage their money effectively. They're very focused on student loan payoff. I think they're really in the conversations I've had with them, in our content team's work in kind of developing the campaigns we're going to be rolling out with them. They are a phenomenal brand to be in the esports space. We're really, really excited to have them.
Do you see the interest in sponsorships increasing or leveling off kind of going forward?
Well, increasing, knock on wood. I mean, you're asking the wrong guy to get a balanced answer. I guess so. But I'll give you a little bit better of an answer there, which is, it's definitely part of what we're betting on as a company is that it will increase, and a lot of that has to do with, again, our strategy in the space, which is to focus on the competitive league products, and hopefully help build the next NBA, the next NFL, and hopefully we're already doing that, but it's it's a focus of ours as an individual organization.
It's a brick by brick process, I imagine.
Exactly.
So John, for all the softballs I've thrown you, I have to throw you a fastball every now and then. Mark Cuban famously said that investing in a U.S. esports team was a bad investment. I think he called it an awful business. If you were to respond to that, what would you say?
I'd say investing in an NBA franchise is an awful investment.
Touche.
Who's playing games now?
That's the quick answer. But it's this. I view it as the same type of investment, which is, maybe you're losing money, maybe you can make money on it year over year. The big value is long-term growth of the value of the business. And if you told somebody in 1980 what the value of the NBA teams would have been in 2010, every single person in the world who could have gotten enough money together to buy a team would have bought a team in 1980. But you couldn't tell them that because it was a risk.
Yeah.
You could know it, and B, it was a very risky play. So well, there you go.
Well, there's no doubt or question that esports has seen a really a meteoric rise in popularity, in the interest from business. Do you see that pace as being sustainable? Do you think that we've heard of corrections, maybe coming in some way, shape, or form? But I just kind of wanted to get your sense of that, at least, of that comment.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think that the most reasonable answer I have for that is I don't know what pace is sustainable, but I believe growth is sustainable. So, corrections happen in every market, and explosive growth happens in most markets. And I think we've definitely seen some explosive growth in esports. I think we have not seen a massive correction downward at any point. I don't know if that's due or if it's something that will become due. That's not something I'm an oracle enough to predict.
Right.
But if the industry stays healthy for a long time, I can predict that it will happen at some point.
Right.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
because if the industry stays healthy for a long time, it's also going to see a lot of good times.
Well,
absolutely.
John, I think we kept you in the hot seat for long enough. Nick, did you have another question?
Yeah, I want to circle back to one thing, and this is something Steve has heard me ask this before at gaming events and conventions, and I don't know, sometimes people don't seem to understand my question. So I'd love to get your perspective on this. So when I went, and I'm going to take a specific example, and I'm going to contrast a game like Overwatch with a game like Rocket League. A game like Rocket League, you don't have to play the game to really understand what's going on. Everyone can understand that you're trying to get the big ball into the big goal. Contrast that with a game like Overwatch, right? That is super strategically detailed, right? There's a bunch of different characters. They all have unique moves. They all have unique strengths and weaknesses. They have different counters, and there's all the maps. So, give you an example. When I went to the Overwatch finals, the watch party at the Fortress last year, it was easy to tell that, some people there, they play Overwatch all the time and they can tell everything that's going on. How do you bring in a game like Overwatch, new fans that don't already know the game? So just a little bit more explanation. I know it's a long wind up, but I own Overwatch. I've played it before, but I'm no expert. I definitely don't have all the moves and counters memorized. And so when I was watching the game, I was not following along to the same level that a pro would, or that someone who plays the game all the time would. I play enough games to be able to tell by context what's going on, but contrast that with someone who doesn't already play the game. How can Misfits or teams bring in people that aren't already playing these games? It's easier for something like Rocket League, but for something more complex like Overwatch, it's a different story. So what if anything, I mean, is that a lost cause, or what if anything? Is it the live events you mentioned, or is it's something else?
No, that's another great question, and it's one that we think about a lot. And hopefully we can continue to improve. I have a bunch of small answers to it. I think the last thing you said is a big part of it, which is, regardless of your level of understanding, there is, at the base level, it's really fun to go to a live event where people are psyched up and the crowd is going wild. And so I think live events will help with that a lot. And it'll also help because it will, live events, if you're watching at home and, your significant other's in the other room, or your parents are there, like, nobody has to watch with you. At a live event, if somebody wants to go, hopefully they're bringing people with them and educating those people themselves as they come. So that's another result of live matches in market that helps answer that question. The other kind of big answer that I have to this kind of question always is, how does football get fans, right? I get football's not quite to the level of obfuscation, whatever the word is, that Overwatch is, because you've got at least you have a ball in football. I can see you've got the cart in Overwatch for most matches, with a percentage counter, but I'm married a woman who didn't have a TV growing up and never watched sports, and I'm a big football fan, and educating her about football took time.
It was probably harder than you thought.
To do it. Yeah, she was willing to do it because she loves me and she wanted to spend time with me. But it definitely was like, there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of her falling asleep in the middle of games, a lot of really, like, it's for anybody who doesn't grow up passionate about it, there's a learning curve. For
football also has the benefit of you can ask anybody on the street how football works, and 90% of them are going to know, right? Not quite the same for games that are 4 years old.
Yeah, not quite the same. You're right, and that's just a time factor, right? That's as long as the Overwatch League continues to run, which hopefully is a long time, more and more people will have that built-in understanding of what Overwatch is. Whatever percentage of the population that is can help educate the others.
And like what you both said, a team can only do so much. I think game companies can also do stuff too, and the league generally, you probably invest in good casting. I think that's super helpful to have people who are talking at the time of the match, what's going on, and give a basic but also engaged level of conversation. I think that'll help. Yeah,
no, that's a great point to bring up, Steve. Like, this is not a Florida Mayhem issue. This is an Activision Blizzard question, and we all want to help solve it. But yeah, it's a fun. This one is kind of a fun problem to have, because it really is. We've got there are millions and millions of people who play this game every day, but there are billions who have never sniffed it. And how can we make it fun to those people is a good question. It's a fun question.
And it's almost a tightrope walk from a game design perspective, right? Because on the one hand, people want to play very strategically deep, complex games, and that, with a high skill ceiling. But the more of that you do, the less understandable it's going to be for the average viewer. And that sweet spot is going to be very hard to hit.
Yeah, for sure. And you brought it up, and I hate to give them free marketing because we don't have a team, but Rocket League is an awesome game. It is easier to understand, and it's they've done a really good job of holding their events, building their audience, and marketing it. I'm surprised it doesn't have more viewership than it does because of that. But yeah, I mean, again, this is something we're going forward. It's obviously a known issue, and I would put lots of money on it affecting the game development process in a lot of cases.
If you guys decide you want to field the world's worst Rocket League team, Steve and I stand ready.
Yeah.
All right, good to know.
We'll be your A team. Well, John, I think that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for taking the time. Want to make sure to give you a second to just maybe say how people can connect with you and other things you might have going on.
Yeah, thank you so much. So follow us on social media. Subscribe to our YouTube channels. We have them for Florida Mayhem, Florida Mutineers, Misfits Gaming, all three. I'm at John Kracum on Twitter. You can follow me, but I'm not that interesting. And watch us when we play online. We Overwatch League got back into action last weekend. Call of Duty League. I don't know that they've officially announced something, so I'm not gonna say anything here except keep your eyes open. We should be back in action soon. And
Excellent.
And yeah, make sure you root for the Florida and Misfits teams.
Excellent. And be sure to look out for other episodes of the LAN Party Lawyers podcast. You can check out our other episodes from Season 1 and Season 2. Connect with us on Instagram, Twitter, or our webpage, landpartylawyers.com. We love to hear your comments and opinions about topics we cover, so if you have any, please reach out. And until next time, game on.
Game on.
You've been listening to the LAN Party Lawyers podcast series with Steve Blickensderfer and Nick Brown. To learn more about our e-gaming and esports practice, visit carltonfields.com. This podcast is intended for general information and educational purposes only and should not be relied on as if it were advice about a particular fact situation. The distribution of this podcast is not intended to create, and receipt of it does not constitute an attorney-client relationship with Carlton Fields. Thanks for listening.